For this video, I'm going to talk about the Predator Poison Glacial build, and this is a build that I have had a lot of success with recently. I jokingly call it the best second place build in the game because I very frequently end up finishing second place because you usually run into something that will ultimately end up stopping either your Olaf or your Kog'Maw, because those are your traditional carries in this build. And this is a very carry dependent build. You have a lot of disruption between the glacial triggers and the poison slowing down ability casts. You can really disrupt the enemy team, but you don't have a lot of damage to go with that disruption outside of Olaf and or Kog'Maw traditionally. So if you get some unlucky rolls or they get a lucky burst or a crit or something of that nature, then they can sometimes take you out. So that being said, let's talk about the core of the build. The core revolves around an early game that is Predator based. So you want units like Warwick, Rek'Sai, and Kog'Maw to turn those on. Those are your tier 1 and tier 2 units you want to target early. And if you get a bunch of Kog'Maws early, then you might want to consider trying to 3-star Kog'Maw and make him be your carry. If you do not get a lot of Kog'Maws early, do not fret. Instead, you're going to focus on trying to level aggressively so that you're one of the first people rolling for tier 4 units and you can get Olaf early and active. And so Olaf is the other carry if you do not get a lot of Kog'Maws early. So it's a flexible build in that regard, but either way you are stacking one singular carry. So the rest of the build after the Predators, you're trying to turn on Poison. You traditionally do that with Mundo and Twitch to go with your Kog'Maw, because that allows you to turn on Berserker with Mundo, Volibear, and Olaf. It also allows you to turn on Ranger with Ezreal and Twitch. And I want to talk about itemization a little bit here. One thing to note is if you do get a spatula, traditionally what I do at that point is I try to make a frozen mallet to put on Twitch, and then I take the leveling build of this where you're going to be Olaf focused, because I also plan on going to 9 at that point so that I can jam in Braum and get to the last tier of Glacial. I will also oftentimes go with the leveling build, or at least transition to it, if I get my hands on an early Singed, because he's a great unit. Singed is a truck. If you can get yourself to a 2-star Singed, he does so much work, but even just the first Singed is great, and trying to fit him into this build is usually going to pay off. It's going to be worth it. So this is, more than I think any other build, the most common one where I find myself saving my money to potentially go to 9, because it does so well at 9. You get to keep all your synergies, but you get really powerful units. Itemization, though, outside of the frozen mallet, if Kog'Maw is your carry, if you get a bunch of Kog'Maws early, I'm a big fan of things like Runan's Hurricane, Static Shiv, Luden's Echo. The reason for that is because the Predator ability, the Predator trigger, where it will execute any enemy below 25% health, works with item triggers. So, for example, the Runan's Hurricane, with the additional shots going out, that gives you, 3 chances to execute something. When Static Shiv triggers and does its damage to units nearby, the Static Shiv can trigger execute. Similarly, Luden's, when he uses his artillery, can trigger the execute. So that's why this itemization is kind of item damage focused. Now, if you don't get a lot of Kog'Maws, but in your hunt for Kog'Maw, you accidentally get a bunch of Rek'Sai, this is the rarest version of the build I find, but if you 3-star a Rek'Sai, you can transition Rek'Sai to being your carry of choice, if you will, because it's a great unit. It's just not usually the thing I end up targeting. If Rek'Sai ends up being your carry, I still like Static Shiv, Luden's Echo, things like that, but I'm actually a really big fan of Ionic Spark, because Rek'Sai's high health total means that Spark will trigger and Spark can execute. I also am a big fan of Titanic Hydra, because it creates that kind of cleaving action where you can trigger execute, and then I usually throw a defensive item as the third item on Rek'Sai when Rek'Sai is my carry. Rek'Sai the Queen, I might have said he earlier, but it is a she, and I need to make sure that I'm giving it the proper respect it deserves. Rek'Sai is a queen, no less. Now, traditionally, however, just because I'm unlucky, I guess. I don't know. I don't usually end up with a lot of Kog'Maws. In fact, for whatever reason, whenever I end up in this build, Kog'Maw's like the last unit that I 2-star. I find myself going leveling aggressively and going Olaf. So when I go Olaf, the 3 items that I personally like to target are Rageblade, Bloodthirster, and Static Shiv. Rageblade and Bloodthirster are the 2 really key items. Rageblade makes him attack faster and faster for the rest of the round. The faster he attacks, the more likely he is to 1, generate mana to get his ult off, 2, trigger the Glacial, and that's really important because you can kind of create this perma stun or this stun lock moment where if it's just him and 1 or 2 other units left, he can just win you the game because they never get the opportunity to take an action. And I say 1 to 2 units because as long as Berserker is turned on, the Berserker ability can also trigger Glacial when he's kind of cleaving in that cone. Now, Bloodthirster is important because Olaf only auto attacks. Even once he uses his ult, he doesn't do any other damage outside of auto attacks, so you heal the most from Bloodthirster. If you can't craft a Bloodthirster, you can, as a really horrible backup, go with something like the Gunblade, but you really want a Bloodthirster and at least a Rageblade. Now, my personal favorite is Static Shiv as the next item because it still lets him attack faster, it gives him an additional damage source, but it also, because it starts with mana, gets him to using his ability that much faster, and that's really key. However, if you cannot make the Static Shiv, don't fret. Defensive items are great. Other attack speed items are great. So something like the Giant Slayer, for example, still lets him attack faster, and you're going to be triggering the effect pretty often. It's a great item. Something like Hand of Justice is also great. Has the potential to give him additional life on hit on top of the Bloodthirster. Also starts with that mana to get him to using his ability that much faster, so Hand of Justice is fine. But again, defensive items are great. Phantom Dancer is beautiful so that he doesn't accidentally get critically hit and murdered before he gets the chance to use his ability. Warmogs, great. Even a Dragon's Claw or a Locket, a Thornmail, anything that's just going to keep him alive long enough to get ramped up and going, it can get the job done. So this is the build. Now, weaknesses, I kind of touched on it a little bit earlier. This is a very hyper carry focused build. You have a lot of disruption with Glacial and Poison, and you can finish units off with Predator, but your actual damage is pretty light. You're usually focused on just Olaf and or just Kog'Maw to get the job done. Now, outside of your 3 items on your main carry, if you do get additional items, usually my backup is then Ezreal. And the reason for that is because Ezreal with the Ranger ability is going to get a lot of attacks in. Also, his spell counts for on-hit effects, so he has a lot of ways to trigger Glacial. For example, if Olaf is my main carry, but I also end up with a Hurricane and a Giant Slayer on Ezreal, that's beautiful because it's a decent damage source, but it's a lot of additional disruption as well, and that's a good backup plan. But more often than not, it's, what can the rest of your team do to stall and disrupt so that either Olaf and or Kog'Maw can get up and running and get the job done. And you'll lose some games here or there, or you'll finish second a lot, I guess I should say, because you'll lose some rounds here or there because Olaf accidentally gets murdered, Kog'Maw accidentally gets murdered. When you get to where there's just you and 1 to 2 other players left, pay very close attention to positioning. You're going to get people that will try to reposition assassins or reposition units so that they can try to kill your Olaf early. So sometimes it's right to have him in the front line. Sometimes you want to put him in the back. Sometimes you want to put him in the middle to protect from assassins jumping to him. At the end of the game, positioning with this build I find matters a lot, both in terms of triggering your disruption and then also protecting your main carry. And as I said, this is the build I find myself going to 9 the most often with, whether that is to go 2/6 Glacial because I have found a Mallet, or maybe I find Lux, who's a Glacial. That's another reason to do it from time to time. Or Singed. Singed is just beautiful in this build. If you can't go to 9, then dropping Ranger to put in Singed is usually worth it. Twitch is okay, but if you don't have a Frozen Mallet on it and you're not sacrificing, you know, the tier 3 of Glacial, if you're going to keep tier 2 of Glacial and you want Poison active, losing Ranger to add Singed is the way to go. But again, more often than not, I find myself on the economy train just because I personally have really bad luck getting Kog'Maw for whatever reason. So I'm usually trying to race to Olaf anyway, and then since I've already focused on economy and XP, I just kind of keep riding that train all the way to 9 so that I can jam in Singed as an additional unit. So this is the build, and it's a lot of fun. If you made it this far, you're still listening to me ramble, I appreciate you. Thanks for watching. Remember to have fun when you're playing, and hopefully I'll catch you watching future videos.